it will not be late.
Hello there, I'm Lloyd Evans. Welcome to The Attic. You're watching my review of the 2023 Exercise Patience Regional Convention of Jehovah's Witnesses. We're up to the Saturday afternoon session, which features a talk about instant gratification, a symposium titled Better to be Patient Than to be Haughty in Spirit, the first part of this year's feature drama titled Commit Your Way to Jehovah, and a talk by governing body member Mark Sanderson about persecution. So with all of that to look forward to, let's roll the first clip.
I've heard it illustrated this way. A man is on death row. He's scheduled to be executed tomorrow. Today, he gets to order whatever he wants for his last meal. Now, when he's deciding what to order, do you think he's going to concern himself with how much sugar is in that meal? Or sodium or carbs or whatever? No way. He has no future health to concern himself about. His only concern right now is whatever pleasure he can obtain immediately at the moment. Illustrating what? Well, a number of people actually feel very much like that man on death row, because they reason, well, how long do we live? 70, 80 years? Life is short. So why are we going to concern ourselves with the future? The thing we want to do is obtain as much pleasure as we can out of life right now. And that mindset has led a number of people into a lifestyle of instant gratification. The essence of that is do the fun things first. You play now, work later. Do whatever makes you feel good now, worry about consequences later. Instant gratification. But there is a number of reasons to beware of instant gratification. You know, studies show that even in this relatively short life, those who generally opt to take care of pleasure first, they're unhappier and they're less successful. Now, what about those who delay gratification? Now, here's the person who takes care of business first and enjoys his relaxation later. It's a way of life, right? Well, studies show that these people are happier and they are more successful in the things they set out to do. Thus, a reason to beware of instant gratification.
Yes, beware instant gratification, so says Ed Algan, a Bethelite from the Warwick, New York headquarters of Jehovah's Witnesses. He's taking the first item on the Saturday afternoon session of this year's Exercise Patience Convention titled, Why Beware of Instant Gratification? And right out of the blocks, it seems that Ed Algan is arguing strongly against hedonism. He doesn't like the philosophy of pleasure being a purpose for living in and of itself. And to illustrate his thinking on this, he's given this illustration of the person on death row who isn't going to concern himself with whether his meal is unhealthy, with whether his meal has too much fat or too much sugar or too many carbs. Look, I suppose my problem is not with any philosophical stance against hedonism. I personally am quite sympathetic to hedonism. I think there's nothing wrong with enjoying life and with pleasure being a purpose in and of itself, because life is so short. There's no proof that it continues once we die. There's no proof that any all-wise, all-knowing, all-powerful deity is going to help us cheat death and attain some bliss afterwards. So yes, I think in moderation, it's good to have a bit of a hedonistic attitude. The difference for Ed Algen is that that doesn't square with the indoctrination he's pushing in this talk. Instant gratification is a no-no for Jehovah's Witnesses because it runs directly counter to the control that the organization wants to wield over members. If you have millions of Jehovah's Witnesses who see no problem whatsoever with getting pleasure now, in the here and now, with pursuing a lifestyle that brings them happiness, then you have a worldwide following who will be less likely to take seriously your demands for obedience and loyalty and submitting yourself to this hamster wheel of constant activity to further the interests of the organization, even if it's at the expense of your happiness or gratification in the here and now. And as a basis for his argument, as a reason why Jehovah's Witnesses should forego happiness and gratification in the here and now, Ed Algen wants us to consider studies.
You know, studies show that even in this relatively short life, those who generally opt to take care of pleasure first, they're unhappier and they're less successful.
Yes, trust me, folks. I've done my research here. There are studies on this. I'm not going to give you any citations. I'm not going to give you any names or dates or any references that can be verified. Just trust me that there are studies that back up everything that I'm saying. Look, what he's saying, what Ed Algen is arguing, isn't entirely without merit. I just think that he's coming at this from an extremely black and white position. In other words, either you are into instant gratification, as he puts it, either you are wholly hedonistic to the point of being self-destructive, to the point of living your life without any regard whatsoever for the consequences, or you are doing things properly and completely rejecting the principle of instant gratification. You are putting success and your future interests ahead of the here and now. I think there's somewhere in between. I don't think things are anywhere near as black and white as this Bethelite is suggesting. But let's hear him out. Let's hear what else he has to say about the world's attitude to instant gratification.
The devil exploits the seeming brevity of life to intensify the temptation to sin. Or let me put it this way. Some forms of instant gratification lead right into sinning against Jehovah. And you and I don't want that. But it can happen in two ways. Some pleasures can be appropriately obtained, maybe even in this system, but not right away. For example, Jehovah requires that we postpone sexual relations until we're married, waiting. Also, other pleasures are entirely off limits, like the misuse of drugs or the misuse of alcohol, even though they might deliver some immediate pleasure. So these are strong reasons to beware of instant gratification. Here's another strong reason. Can we go to 1 John chapter 2? 1 John 2:17, furthermore, the world is passing away, and so is its desire. But the one who does the will of God remains forever. So the world is on death row. But those who are serving Jehovah, he holds out this reward of everlasting life in the new world where all of our proper desires will be completely fulfilled. This prospect takes us off of death row. It means we don't have to go through life thinking this is my last meal. In fact, we do go through life making sure that we don't forfeit that beautiful reward of everlasting life just because we want to get something out of life right now. Nor do we want to do anything that distances us from our loving God who holds out that everlasting future to us. So what are we saying, really? What are we saying? Are we saying that all forms of instant gratification are wrong? Not necessarily, not in every case. But often it is.
Not in every case. But yeah, that's mostly what we're saying. Oh, bless him. So yes, Ed Algen giving us a little bit more flesh on the bones when it comes to his view and the organization's view of instant gratification. And unsurprisingly, when he's thinking about the ways that you can screw up in life, the ways that you can live in a way that is self-destructive, he's immediately going to sex, drugs, and alcohol.
For example, Jehovah requires that we postpone sexual relations until we're married, waiting. Also, other pleasures are entirely off limits, like the misuse of drugs or the misuse of alcohol, even though they might deliver some immediate pleasure.
So there you have it, plain as day. It's mostly about sexual repression, isn't it? That's mostly where his mind is going to when he's talking about instant gratification. He is representing in this talk an organization that wants to police people's lives, that wants to micromanage people, even in such intimate areas as the bedroom, as sexuality. And this is an organization that, quite frankly, is more obsessed with policing what consenting adults do sexually between themselves than policing the cover-up of abuse or abuse itself. They're more interested in clamping down on people's healthy sex lives than making sure that their organization is free from criminals and making sure that criminals get reported to the authorities. That's how twisted things are. I mean, when we're talking about drugs and alcohol, I mean, obviously, I think we can all agree that he's onto something there, that you can pay a price for having a wholly hedonistic outlook when it comes to any form of substance abuse. You can pay a very, very heavy price, in fact. It can kill you to be an alcoholic or to be addicted to drugs. But you don't need to be a Jehovah's Witness to know this, do you? You just need to be a thinking adult with a modicum of intelligence to know that if you give yourself over to drugs and booze, you're going to end up in a bad place. That's just objectively the case. That's something that the world advocates against if we're thinking about health organizations and that sort of thing. So he isn't offering us any unique wisdom. It seems to me patently obvious that this is mostly about sex and policing people's sex lives. And then he comes out with this absolute gem about the world being on death row.
So the world is on death row. But those who are serving Jehovah, he holds out this reward of everlasting life in the new world where all of our proper desires will be completely fulfilled. This prospect takes us off of death row.
Does he need to say it any more clearly? You are on death row if you're not one of Jehovah's Witnesses. Irrespective of your philosophy when it comes to hedonism or instant gratification, you're on death row if you're not living your life according to the Jehovah's Witness organization and its demands and its requirements to police people's lives. That's the organization we're dealing with. And even though Edward Algen projects this image of being this fairly sweet, reasonable, grandfatherly figure who's imparting wisdom, What he's actually imparting in this talk is some incredibly toxic, incredibly controlling, and incredibly black and white cult thinking that is intended not to help people, not to give people a healthy attitude towards pleasure and happiness and hedonism or gratification. This talk is intended to funnel people towards an organization intent on controlling them.
Maintaining Jehovah's moral standards involves more than just avoiding sex before marriage. Colossians chapter 3 warns against all forms of uncleanness. And that involves things that don't deal with waiting for later, but avoiding entirely. Like immoral fantasizing, like pornography, or similar provocative images. So what if a person finds it very difficult to keep away from some of these forms of uncleanness? Let's take pornography as an example, okay? Person finds it very hard to avoid viewing pornography. What can he do? Just more willpower, more fortitude, more determination? Probably not enough. What else does he need? Let's go to 1 Thessalonians chapter 4. 1 Thessalonians 4, starting at verse 3, "For this is the will of God, that you should be holy and abstain from sexual immorality. Each one of you should know how to control his own body in holiness and honor, not with greedy, uncontrolled sexual passion like the nations have that do not know God." Did you catch that expression? Know how. Know how to control our body and our minds too. Knowing how, because breaking and remaining free from a vice like pornography often requires knowing how, learning specific skills and strategies and lifestyle changes, new thinking patterns. It involves learning how. And a lot of this is explained in our literature, the publications of the slave. You can find them using the index or the research guide.
Edward Algan there, Bethelite from the Warwick headquarters of Jehovah's Witnesses, giving us all a darn good lesson about porn. And explaining how the organization's publications, the Jehovah's Witness organization's publications, going back decades, can give you specific skills and strategies to stop you from viewing porn, apparently. So yes, well, we're going to look at an example of some of the wisdom from past Watchtower publications shortly. But again, what is it with this obsession with sex? The organization is obsessed, I think, with policing people's sex lives and policing people's sexuality. Let's be completely honest, and I understand that some of you watching might be asexual. You might not have a strong component of your identity that is sexual, or any component of your identity that is sexual. The more we learn about human sexuality, the more we learn that it's a very nuanced subject. But if you're not asexual, I think I can safely say that we've all at some point viewed pornography, or we've all at some point done what he's describing here. The guy is lying, quite frankly, if he's going to suggest that he hasn't at some point viewed porn, assuming he isn't asexual. And that's not to give a blanket endorsement to porn. Obviously, the porn industry is riven with exploitation. You know, that's a whole other subject. But what he's talking about here is any imagery whatsoever that is designed to excite people sexually. Let's be honest, stuff that people would masturbate to. And imagery, erotic imagery, goes back right through to ancient times. What's interesting is nowhere in the Bible does it forbid erotic imagery, which it could easily do if you think about it. It doesn't need to use the word pornography. It just simply needs to say you're not allowed to look at any images, any graven images or any pictures of the naked human form. It could easily say that somewhere in the Bible. But interestingly, the Bible writers didn't mention that at all. In fact, if we're going to talk about what the Bible has to say about sex, I think Edward Elgin is being incredibly disingenuous in just singling out the parts where it condemns sexual immorality, given how many examples there are in the Bible of utter sexual depravity, in some instances endorsed or even mandated by God. And if you don't know what I'm talking about, here's a thumbnail to a recent video I put out with 25 examples of sexual depravity in the Bible. So it's incredibly misleading to suggest that if you follow the Bible, you are going to be happy to submit yourself to a sexually repressive regime that polices you and tells you, forbids you from viewing any kind of erotic imagery. Ed Algen is, quite frankly, again, just presenting this black and white worldview where there is no room for nuance or balance. And the only way you can satisfy your sexual needs, if you are a sexual person, is not just through marriage, but specifically through marriage within the Jehovah's Witness organization and through straight marriage. So you're not allowed to masturbate. You're not allowed to be gay. You're not allowed to have sex before marriage. And you're not allowed to marry someone who isn't one of Jehovah's Witnesses. There are all sorts of other rules, by the way, thumbnail here if Tibor is gracious, that David Splain came up with not so long ago, where he gave even more rules policing the sexuality of Jehovah's Witnesses. It's an incredibly toxic and unhealthy environment to grow up in. And I believe the damage, the impact that this sexual repression has on Jehovah's Witnesses cannot be overstated. I think it really does a lot of damage. I feel like it damaged me. I feel like a lot of what's gone wrong in my life is a direct result of the way this organization has interfered with me as a sexual being. I'm just going to put it bluntly. And the solution for Ed Algen, if you are struggling with porn, if you are struggling in any way to keep lockstep with the organization's demands when it comes to sexuality, is to dip into the organization's past literature so that you can pick up specific skills and strategies to help you cope. Well, let's do that, shall we? Let's go into one of the organization's books for young people, Your Youth Getting the Best Out of It, pages 39 and 40. Let's actually focus on one paragraph, paragraph 9. This is the sort of wisdom that Ed Algen is referring to when it comes to dipping into the spiritual food that's been supplied by the faithful slave to help Jehovah's Witnesses deal with their sexual needs. Weakly giving in to sexual desires by masturbation will certainly not give you strength when faced with a situation tempting you to commit fornication or even homosexuality. Just the opposite, it cultivates wrong thinking and wrong desire. In fact, masturbation can lead into homosexuality. In such instances, the person not satisfied with his lonely sexual activity seeks a partner for mutual sex play. That's the wisdom. How did we take this seriously? You know, this book, Your Youth Getting the Best Out of It, I am old enough that this at one point was a current book for young people to read, that I had to read. So I was in the audience at the convention when they first released Young People Ask. And prior to that, this red book, maybe Tibor can show an image of it if he's feeling especially gracious. He's always gracious, isn't he? This little red book of horrors was my guidebook to understanding my body, my sexuality, everything to do with my relationships. And this is the sort of wisdom it contained. A paragraph telling a generation or generations of young Jehovah's Witnesses, if you masturbate, it might make you gay.
All right, moving on. A second area where we need to beware is in choosing a mate. I think we all know 1 Corinthians 7:39 says we're free to marry only in the Lord, right? Fellow believers, yes. So what if instead of waiting for a suitable marriage mate in the truth, there arises an opportunity right now to enter into a relationship or develop a relationship with a non-believer? Beware, because marrying an unbeliever can cause and produce a lifetime of heartache. But you know something? So can marrying a believer. Don't tell me you know that. No. Going to drive this overtime? No. No, in all seriousness, then, yes, marrying a believer, if that person, if that believer is spiritually immature or emotionally immature. Now, would that be a sin? Would it be a sin to marry a believer who is just not spiritually stable? It wouldn't be a sin, no. But my, would it ever be unwise? If a person thinks it's better to marry a person with questionable spirituality than risk not marrying at all, think again, because more than a few are living in anguish, not because they married out of the truth, but because they married a believer whose faith was fragile, whose appreciation for spiritual things was shallow, and whose love for Jehovah was marginal. By contrast, others have waited until they could marry someone rich in faith and in appreciation and love for Jehovah. Their patience brought them not temporary pleasure, but a good and perfect and lasting gift. Decades later, they're still thanking Jehovah for each other. Be wise, be patient. Wait until you can marry a person with genuine devotion to Jehovah and Jehovah's ways.
If you've never been one of Jehovah's Witnesses and you're just curious about what this group has to say on the subject of patience at their 2023 Exercise Patience Convention, I hope you're paying attention. It's clearly not just a generic seminar on how to cultivate patience in all sorts of situations, such as when you're in traffic, as Mark Sanderson put it in his opening comments. Clearly, it's not about that. Clearly, they're just taking a word like they always do and putting a doomsday black and white culty spin on things. And in this particular instance, Ed Algen, who's a Warwick Bethelite, giving the talk, Why Beware of Instant Gratification, is doubling down on the organization's policy regarding marrying only in the Lord. I did find it humorous when he tripped himself up with what was clearly intended as a throwaway remark about how even people who have married fellow Jehovah's Witnesses have ended up with a lifetime of heartache. And this elicited laughter, and you could actually see him processing his own words and thinking, oh gosh, how do I get out of this? And then he explains what he means. What he means is marrying only in the Lord is one thing, but you can cause yourself a lifetime of heartache if you marry the wrong type of Jehovah's Witness. So it's not even about just marrying a fellow Jehovah's Witness. It's not even as simple as that. When it comes to the rules on sex, when it comes to these multiple layers of sexual repression that Jehovah's Witnesses have to deal with, that young Jehovah's Witnesses have to navigate, they can't just choose from this already small pool of fellow believers when they're selecting a mate with whom they need to get married in order to have sex. It has to be a super duper Jehovah's Witness who takes the religion really seriously. That's what Ed Algen is saying here. And he's saying this may require that you wait an awful long time. In other words, you could go to your grave without ever meeting anybody because no one's ever good enough. No one's ever sufficiently loving Jehovah or doing what they're supposed to do. And you just don't meet someone because you're in such an insular, small bubble as a Jehovah's Witness. Whereas when you're not a Jehovah's Witness, it's not so much of an issue because you get to choose a mate based on whether they are a good person and whether you connect well with them. So you don't have these shackles to consider. But thank you, Ed Algen, for just putting everything out there and making it so abundantly clear that this convention isn't simply about patience or cultivating patience or helping people be more patient. It's about doubling down on the need for obedience and loyalty, the need to comply with the organization's demands and expectations when it comes to sex and marriage.
All these bills. And so little we can afford. I can hardly breathe.
Wait till you're married. That might never happen.
It's been hard since Monica died. It's good to talk to someone who understands me.
A promotion would fix all this.
She understands me.
Sometimes I wonder, what would it be like to be with Marco? It's like everyone knows about sex, but me.
Okay. They'll want some evenings, weekends, my meetings, service, my kids. Maybe I could make it work.
Jehovah has always been there for me.
But I know why Jehovah tells us to wait. He doesn't deny us good things. He protects us so we don't get hurt.
Jehovah understands me best. I want to stay close to him.
I know Jehovah knows what we need. And he will provide, because he promised it. And he always has. I am determined to wait patiently on my God.
And never do anything that would displease him.
Because his blessings are so worth the wait.
Welcome to the world of Jehovah's Witnesses, I guess. This dramatization is all about resisting temptation as a Jehovah's Witness. It's being shown to Jehovah's Witnesses at their 2023 Exercise Patience Convention in the Saturday afternoon session. The talk is entitled, Why Beware of Instant Gratification? And what we've really seen are three areas depicted in which a Jehovah's Witness might come up against temptation. And they're all completely harmless. So we're not talking about pressure to get involved in drugs. We're not talking about any threat of developing an addiction to substances or substance abuse. We're not talking about anything where the individual is in any kind of danger. We're talking about a scenario where a Jehovah's Witness single man, maybe a widower, is friendly with a lady who is his age at work. So there's the potential, it seems, for that to become a romantic attachment. There's a scenario where there's a young girl at school who could get romantically involved with one of her schoolmates. And there's a situation where a woman who is in dire need of financial assistance is offered a promotion at work that would conflict with her meeting schedule so that she has to miss some of the meetings. Those are the scenarios that they've chosen. So it's clearly not about instant gratification, is it? It's not a well thought out, well reasoned argument against hedonism, against simply enjoying life and being unashamed to live life for the enjoyment, life being so short. This is all about, again, making sure Jehovah's Witnesses are put well and firmly in their place, specifically with regards to two areas, sex and the organization's meetings. Apparently, in order to be a good person, in order to be worthy of survival at Armageddon, you need to be in a romantic relationship with a fellow believer, and you need to be in employment that doesn't conflict with whatever arbitrary meeting schedule your local Jehovah's Witnesses have organized.
Well, moving on, the second way to resist the appeal of instant gratification is strengthen your faith in Jehovah's promises, especially Jehovah's promise of a new world. Now, it's true, like the video said, right now, Jehovah's blessing us with a lot. He's not holding back anything good, only warning us against what's harmful. However, our resistance is much stronger if we're looking forward to and counting on that new world. But even here, some might say, yes, but what if I pass on all the pleasures that this world has to offer, right? And then I don't make it into the new world anyway? I'd miss out on everything. How tragic is that? Now, that concern was addressed in the Watchtower, 1973, February 1, pages 71 and 81. Right? And it explained there that when Jesus' disciples approached him with a similar concern, He told them all things are possible with God, meaning that you can make it into the new world if that's what you really want, with Jehovah's help. With Jehovah's help, it doesn't matter what your past influence has been, your inherited tendencies, your upbringing, whatever. You are not so spiritually handicapped that you cannot meet Jehovah's basic standards for life and make it into the new world. You can make it. We each can with Jehovah's help. So there's no reason to choose this world just in case.
Oh, that's a relief. Thank you, Ed Algan, Bethelite, from the Warwick, New York headquarters of Jehovah's Witnesses, who's speaking here at the Saturday afternoon session of the Exercise Patience Convention. His theme, Why Beware of Instant Gratification. He's dealing with a just-in-case scenario. I'm trying to think what we would call this. Is this like an inverse Pascal's wager? I honestly hadn't even thought of this, even when I was one of Jehovah's Witnesses, but maybe some Jehovah's Witnesses have, if it's big enough for them to have dealt with it in the publications. Apparently sufficient numbers of Jehovah's Witnesses in the past have grappled with the question, what if I forego all of the pleasures of the world? What if I forego pursuing happiness in the here and now, and then Armageddon comes and it turns out I don't make the grade anyway, which is actually quite a sensible concern given how difficult it is to make the grade. I mean, think about all of the rules that Jehovah's Witnesses need to abide by, all of the hoops they need to jump through. There's never really a point, is there, when you're one of Jehovah's Witnesses, where you can just sit back and relax a little bit and think, well, I'm going to make it. You know, bring Armageddon tomorrow because I'm a dead cert to make it through to paradise. I don't think any Jehovah's Witness feels that way, because you're not really allowed to feel that way by the organization. You're always constantly in a state of doubting whether you're worthy. So I guess it's inevitable that some will have said, either now or in the past, well, if it's all a probability anyway, why don't I just go hell for leather? And why don't I just at least enjoy the life I have now? Kind of makes a little bit of sense, really. But what Ed Algan is doing here is he's first of all resorting to presuppositional argumentation. He's presupposing that Armageddon will come. He's presupposing that there will be a time when everybody who isn't a Jehovah's Witness will be slaughtered and the world will be terraformed into a paradise where surviving worthy Jehovah's Witnesses will live. So that's going to be always a massive problem with his argument. I've already done a video thumbnail here, if Tibor is gracious, on the many, many problems with the paradise teaching. Frankly, it unravels when you subject it to even minimal scrutiny. And he's also injecting a bit of straw man fallacy. I mean, Ed Algan paints this picture of, again, all or nothing. Either you are a Jehovah's Witness and you're doing everything properly and you're going to survive Armageddon because you're observing all of the requirements and demands placed upon you by the organization, or you're this entirely debauched, hedonistic person who is only interested in instant gratification, no matter the cost, even if it's self-destructive, even if it's self-destructive behavior that will harm you. Maybe you're going to end up with some kind of dependency on drugs, that sort of thing. There's no middle ground. There's no nuance whatsoever in his argumentation. There's no allowance for, frankly, just normal people which I think is the majority, who say, well, okay, there are pleasures that I can pursue in life, and my life, it has more meaning and more purpose when I allow myself to experience them. I find life more tolerable when I can enjoy it, and I can enjoy the good things in life. But you know what? I'm going to do that in moderation. I'm going to do that in such a way that I don't hurt myself, and I'm going to have a little bit of forward planning, and I'm going to think about what the future me would want, what their needs might be. So I'm going to try and save some money. I'm going to try and pursue some kind of career goal. I don't know. You can see how there are any number of waypoints between these two extremes that exist in Ed Algen's mind. But of course, he's going to push this black and white thinking because it serves the organization he represents, the organization whose headquarters he serves at. He's always going to want to keep Jehovah's Witnesses on this perpetual treadmill of fear and self-loathing and sexual repression, and ultimately that, rather than self-fulfillment and leading a balanced, healthy lifestyle, will always be at the core of his talk on instant gratification.
Do you have a family member, a parent, a sibling, some other relative who has stopped serving Jehovah and is disfellowshipped? If so, imitate Abel. Patiently rely on Jehovah. A haughty spirit may cause us to think, what's the harm in calling once in a while to chat? Maybe I can help the person come back to Jehovah. That is haughty thinking. Instead, let's follow the admonition that Jehovah gives us. Proverbs chapter 3, verses 5 and 6. Proverbs chapter 3, and let's read together verses 5 and 6. Trust in Jehovah with all your heart, and do not rely on your own understanding. In all your ways, take notice of him, and he will make your path straight. Trust, like humility, is a quality that works in concert with patience. Abel displayed trust in Jehovah. In Jehovah's arrangement, the discipline administered to his parents for disobeying God. He also trusted in Jehovah's matchless wisdom and love. We know this because he served Jehovah faithfully. His righteousness separated him from his parents and his brothers who did not serve Jehovah. That was no doubt difficult for Abel, but he was confident that in the future, offspring, others would join him in serving Jehovah. He just had to be patient.
Speaking of offspring, didn't Abel have sex with his sister? We've just been listening to Corey Wadlington from the Warkill, New York Bethel facility. He's giving the symposium item, Better to be patient than to be haughty in spirit. Imitate Abel, not Adam. And in all seriousness, what grotesque rhetoric. So Jehovah's Witnesses here who refuse to shun, who cannot bring themselves to break off contact with family members or loved ones who have been disfellowshipped, who cannot lose their humanity in that way. They can't quite switch off their humanity in the way that the organization requires of them. They're here being labeled haughty. Apparently it's a prideful thing for them to even want to reach out to their disfellowshipped relatives. Chilling, isn't it? I mean, many of you watching this will be disfellowshipped or disassociated, and this is the sort of rhetoric your believing family members will be hearing, unfortunately, at this year's convention, because even though Corey Wadlington is just giving the talk at this particular convention that's been chosen for the JW stream, he's reading from an outline, essentially. He's just parroting the words of the organization that Jehovah's Witness speakers all over the world are required to stick to. And maybe you caught it too. There was this weird glitch, wasn't there, earlier on in the clip?
If so, imitate Abel. Patiently rely on Jehovah. A haughty spirit may cause us to think, what's the harm in calling once in a while to chat?
There was a little glitch there, did you notice? And just to be clear, that was not us. That was not myself and Tibor. We didn't edit that. So quite what the original talk said, who knows? Maybe Corey Wadlington said something in between where they clipped it, where it wasn't quite so culty, or maybe it was too culty. We don't know. But I find it interesting that the JW Stream version of the convention on which I'm basing my rebuttal has been edited. So there are certain things that we're not supposed to hear, even in the model convention that's been chosen for the JW Stream. But again, chilling rhetoric about shunning, and I'm afraid there's more.
What else do we learn? That we must be determined to love Jehovah and Jesus more than we love anyone else. And Jesus reiterated this message when he was on earth talking to a group of disciples. And what he said is recorded in Matthew chapter 10 and verse 37. Matthew chapter 10 and verse 37. Whoever therefore has greater affection for father or mother than for me is not worthy of me. And whoever has greater affection for son or daughter than for me is not worthy of me. How do we apply these words? Well, if we have a difficult family situation, a member of our family is disfellowshipped, our affection for them should not be greater than our affection for Jehovah and Jesus. To that end, when reading the Bible and attending our meetings, our goal should be to make our relationship with Jehovah and Jesus stronger and stronger. Another quality that works in concert with patience is hope. Unlike Abel's parents, our dear loved one who is disfellowshipped may still repent. Don't give up hope. By showing patience and supporting the decision that was made to disfellowship our dear loved one, our loved one may come back. They may turn around. May we prove our love for Jehovah by being patient and respecting his arrangement for discipline, even though it's a difficult situation. Jehovah will love us for our patience and will consider us righteous as he does Abel. Divine wisdom in God's word tells us better to be patient than to be haughty in spirit. We learn from the examples of Adam and Abel that this is particularly true when a member of our family is disciplined.
The eagle-eyed among you will have spotted a few more edits there. So every now and then when Corey Wadlington is speaking, in again what is a grotesque pro-shunning talk at this year's 2023 Exercise Patience Convention, every now and then when he's talking, it just jumps a little bit. And just to be absolutely clear, that's not us editing. That's not me or Tibor. Whenever we do an edit, we try to make it clear by doing like a white fade in, fade out thing. So the edits in this talk that we're seeing have been done by the organization. It could have been something completely innocuous. Maybe there was some kind of bad audio, or maybe Corey Wadlington misspoke in some innocuous way. Who knows? But I just want to, for the purposes of housekeeping, make it abundantly clear that we haven't edited this talk to make it look worse or better. This is the JW Stream version of this year's convention. And when it comes to shunning, having already told Jehovah's Witnesses who can't shun or refuse to shun that they are haughty, Corey Wadlington, Bethelite at the Wallkill, New York facility, has the following to say.
What else do we learn? That we must be determined to love Jehovah and Jesus more than we love anyone else.
We must be determined to love Jehovah and Jesus more than anyone else. I'm sorry to keep saying this, but this is supposed to be a convention that ordinary members of the public would find helpful. This has been sold to the public as a convention about helping people cultivate patience, as some kind of self-help seminar. But how culty do you need it to be here? He's literally saying you need to love Jehovah and Jesus more than anyone, including your own family members. And doesn't that make sense in the context of an organization that uses shunning as a control tactic, that weaponizes family relationships as a means of punishment? So that if you disagree with the leadership, if you change your mind about being a Jehovah's Witness, your entire world can collapse around you. Frankly, how dare Corey Wadlington suggest that any of this is scriptural? He invokes verses from the Gospels about a person's enemies being from their own household. I've done a video, thumbnail here if Tibor is gracious, with 14 Bible verses that debunk shunning as practiced by Jehovah's Witnesses. So no matter what verses Corey Wadlington has to throw at us in support of this vile ideology of which he is making himself a mouthpiece, we can find Bible verses that are against shunning, that say, you know what, let's show some mercy here. Let's recognize that we all make mistakes from time to time, and let's just show some love. You know, you can find so many verses in the Bible that have that sort of language where this Pharisaical attitude of excommunication is condemned by Jesus. But of course, none of those Bible verses are convenient in this talk. Instead, what's convenient is for the organization to make Jehovah's Witnesses who are tempted to reach out to their disfellowshipped family members feel terrible. Really, when you think about it, when it comes to the damage that's done by shunning, it's not just the shunned who suffer. It's the ones who are doing the shunning. Because they must be so conflicted. I mean, not all of them will be. I think some Jehovah's Witnesses, like my dad, just aren't that bothered, to be quite honest. That's how I perceive the shunning in my own situation with my father. But there will be many Jehovah's Witnesses who are just being slowly destroyed by all this. They cannot cope with it. They are having to pretend that someone they profoundly love, perhaps someone they brought into the world, who they cradled as a baby, they're having to pretend that these people don't exist. To add insult to injury, to really put the boot in, Corey Wadlington says this.
Unlike Abel's parents, our dear loved one who is disfellowshipped may still repent. Don't give up hope. Our loved one may come back. They may turn around.
Our loved one may come back. They may turn around. Don't give up hope. Keep yourself in this perpetual state of uncertainty where there's always a chance. There's always a chance that the person you're shunning might see the error of their ways and come running back. Well, that does happen, doesn't it? Because the whole tactic, the whole point behind shunning is emotional blackmail. And even the organization's literature acknowledges this aspect of shunning, that it may have the effect of making the person want to come back because they miss their family and they miss their association with their believing loved ones. They're open about it. But how cruel, how sadistic to keep Jehovah's Witnesses who are shunning disfellowshipped or disassociated loved ones, how cruel to keep them in this purgatory of constant denial, where even if their loved one no longer wants to be a Jehovah's Witness for conscientious reasons, they cannot come back because they don't believe it anymore, because they've realized it's not true. Apparently, even in those cases, Jehovah's Witnesses are supposed to live in hope and never give up on the possibility that their loved one will return to Jehovah.
Fight me on everything.
You're wrong about that. That is not true.
Yes, that is true. You know I'm trying to hold this all together.
I'm so tired of this. Every day the same thing. Fight. Argue. Bicker. Then silence.
Meanwhile, the global financial meltdown continues to plague stocks as market prices drop drastically once again today. China's government suspended trading early in fears of a sell-off, and the European markets have begun...
30 years. And this is what it's come to? I just want it to end. We'd probably be happier divorced anyway.
You don't understand. I need this by the end of the day, on my desk, or there's going to be some consequences. You know what? I've heard enough. Goodbye.
Miles divorced about 2 years ago, and even remarried. He doesn't seem any happier. Marriage isn't easy. But I've become so impatient, so focused on my wants, my needs. Maybe the problem isn't who I'm with, but who I've become. With prayer, Jehovah's help, and assistance from the elders, I'm seeing the part that I need to play to improve our relationship. Our issues won't be fixed overnight. We're a work in progress. But we're learning to be more patient, more loving. And we're committed to working on it together.
Well, isn't that lovely? I'm sure everything's going to be just swell now that they're involving the elders and now that they are taking in the counsel from Jehovah's organization. This is a dramatization that gets shown at the Saturday afternoon session of the Exercise Patience Convention during the symposium, Better to be Patient Than to be Haughty in Spirit. The point of this dramatization, as far as I can tell, is to strongly dissuade divorce. And I guess the problem I have with it, well, I have lots of problems with it, to be quite honest. I hate any propaganda that this organization produces that suggests that the Jehovah's Witness organization is conspicuous in offering help and support in everyday mundane situations. So in this case, if a couple is having problems in their marriage, it's only through their faith as Jehovah's Witnesses that they can overcome them. There aren't any secular resources that they should consult. It's not like they can derive any benefit from relationship counselors. It's not like they can, I don't know, do research on psychology and better understanding how the mind works and, you know, any number of ways in which they can work on their relationship without being in a cult. No, they need to have the elders round. They need to have these men pick over their relationship, perhaps in some very intimate details of their relationship, and offer advice that goes along the lines of be better Jehovah's Witnesses, do more Bible studying, do family worship, prepare for the meetings, attend the meetings, do more ministry, that sort of thing. It's, to be honest, it's the same answer that you get in any situation that confronts a Jehovah's Witness. You know, name any scenario in which a Jehovah's Witness might be struggling, whether it's mental health or temptation or bullying. The answer is always be a better Jehovah's Witness. Do more study, do family worship, put kingdom interests first. It's so predictable, isn't it? And when it comes to this specific issue of marital disharmony, look, I'm not going to sit here and say that a couple in this situation should always get divorced. But what I will say is, and this seems fairly self-evident, every couple is different because every human being is different. And it's extremely unhealthy, not to mention arrogant, to present this cookie-cutter solution for every single marriage. So every single marriage needs to follow this advice. Wasn't it interesting when the guy is at work and he sat opposite his work colleague who's called Miles, and he's saying, oh, well, Miles got divorced and he even got remarried and he's not happy. So clearly divorce isn't the answer. So you're taking a sample size of one. You know, one person who, as far as you're concerned, from your subjective experience, isn't happier. And based on that, you're making your decisions. That's the sort of flawed reasoning that Jehovah's Witnesses are being asked to dwell on. Clearly, there's more to it than that. Clearly, if we just apply a little bit of common sense here and a little bit of sensitivity, we can appreciate that relationships are extremely complicated. And yes, in many cases, marriages that are dysfunctional can be salvaged, but in some cases they can't be salvaged. And what's disingenuous about all this is that the whole reason why they are against divorce is because of their extremist position on adultery being the only basis for divorce, meaning that once you're married, even if you're in an abusive relationship, even if your life is at risk, you need to stay married to your partner, according to the Jehovah's Witness religion. So that's why they're against divorce, because they have this extremist position on adultery. But in the world, in Satan's system of things, the way it works when you're doing your adulting is you figure these things out on a case-by-case basis. And you take into account the fact that, you know what, relationships are all different, people are all different. And yes, in some cases, a damaged relationship can be salvaged, but in some cases, divorce is the best answer. And there is no shame in admitting that.
So if there's no other comments, it looks like we're all in agreement. Mario will take over for Tomas as the field service group overseer. And I think that's the last item. So maybe, Brother Leon, could you offer the closing prayer?
Yeah. Our Father Jehovah.
Mario? Seriously? He's practically a kid. He's barely been serving a year.
We all love Jehovah very much, and we all want to do what we can in his service.
Sure, he gives a good talk. But he's not ready for this kind of responsibility. That's an assignment I definitely have the experience for. And now I'm stuck being his assistant? This is going to be a mess.
Still disappointed?
Just doesn't make sense.
Well, if it makes you feel any better, I think you'd have done great in that assignment.
Thanks.
But give Mario a chance.
Okay. I will. With time, I saw exactly why Mario was being used like this. I just had to be patient and check my ego. So I could see what Jehovah sees. And appreciate the privileges I do have.
Yeah, Mario's amazing, isn't he? He would have been my pick for group overseer. So we've just been watching a dramatization that isn't at all cringy, and it's being shown to Jehovah's Witnesses on the Saturday afternoon of the Exercise Patience Convention in the symposium, Better to be Patient Than to be Haughty in Spirit. The specific title under which this dramatization gets shown is Imitate Moses, Not Korah, which kind of tells you the general thrust of the talk in which this dramatization gets shown. And just to save some time and spare you from what was quite a tedious talk, I've just kept it purely to the dramatization, which is actually quite funny. Well, it's funny, but also very telling. It's funny in that they've zeroed in on this really mundane, pointless, irrelevant aspect of Jehovah's Witness congregational politics as something that is so important that it needs to be depicted in a highly produced dramatization and shown to millions of people. It's funny that it's such a problem for them that they're having to do this. And if you think about it, this follows a pattern that we saw in last year's Pursue Peace convention, where they basically run out of subjects for their dramatizations and were really kind of scraping the bottom of the barrel when it came to depicting Jehovah's Witness life, to the point where they were even being very open about elder infighting and the politics that goes on bodies of elders. If Tibor is gracious, you'll see a thumbnail to a relevant sushi so you can see what I'm talking about. What does it say about the organization if they even need to be making this video? For me, it speaks to a very position-oriented, hierarchical organization where your title and your privilege and your assignment and your responsibility is everything. And really, all you need to do is watch JW Broadcasting or listen to these talks and watch the experiences and what have you, and immediately you can see how important privileges are in the Jehovah's Witness organization. Everything is about, well, what specifically are you doing? Are you an elder? Are you a ministerial servant? Are you a regular pioneer? Are you an auxiliary pioneer? Are you a special pioneer? Are you otherwise in full-time service? Maybe as a Bethelite? You know, everything is about position. So if you think about it, isn't it inevitable that situations like this will occur where someone feels like they are being overlooked for a certain position? It's inevitable, really, when you think about it, that this sort of dramatization will be needed in a man-made hierarchical organization like that of Jehovah's Witnesses.
Is oxygen, water, and food equally important to you? They're important, but are they equally important? Maybe you love food. Maybe you're a foodie. Or maybe you have a particular form of brand of water that you especially like. But are they equally important? We can live up to a week or more without food, a few days without water, but only a few minutes without oxygen. So of the three, oxygen, food, water, which is the most important? It's clear. It's oxygen. Because without oxygen, we cannot live. And that's what Jehovah is saying to us here. He has a value system, a set of priorities. Yes, he values our sacrifices, but what he values more is our obedience. See, it's not enough for us to say, I love Jehovah. He's the most important person in my life. We must prove it by obeying Jehovah in everything, not just in the things that we like. Because if we do not cultivate obedience, we will not have Jehovah's approval. If we do not cultivate obedience, we will not live forever. Pride is like a corrosive rust. What makes rust so dangerous is that it corrodes things gradually over time. Often you don't see the effects of the corrosion until it's too late. In most cases, a pipe or a balcony doesn't just burst or collapse the moment rust begins to grow. No, over time, hidden to the site, rust will grow, corrode, and weaken the metal, and then a catastrophe follows. Pride is the same way. You can't look at a person and say, I can see pride growing within them. No, it doesn't work that way. But make no mistake, all of us, we have qualities that make us beautiful to Jehovah. If left unchecked, pride will corrode each and every one of those precious qualities, especially our patience. Do not allow pride to weaken your patience. As Christians, we receive a lot of direction, and we can expect to receive even more direction in the future. If we begin to trust in ourselves, our knowledge, our experience, our abilities, and let pride grow within us, we can become frustrated with theocratic direction.
We've just been hearing from Keith Brown, who is a Bethelite at the Wallkill, New York Bethel facilities. He's taking us through the symposium item, Better to be patient than to be haughty in spirit. Imitate Samuel, not Saul. And what can I say? The cultiness is just amped up, isn't it? To factor 10. It's just there. So Keith clearly is a big fan of using illustrations, and he's wheeling them out one after the other. He's talking about oxygen versus food and water, and talking about how we can apply this to Jehovah's priorities and how Jehovah prioritizes obedience over sacrifice in the same way that we might prioritize oxygen over food and water. And then he goes on to talk about rust, and he describes pride as being like rust, saying that it can erode our good qualities so that by the end, we're no longer as responsive to direction from the organization.
As Christians, we receive a lot of direction, and we can expect to receive even more direction in the future. If we begin to trust in ourselves, our knowledge, our experience, our abilities, and let pride grow within us, we can become frustrated with theocratic direction.
Yeah, you wouldn't want to trust in yourself, would you? That would be a terrible thing. What an awful thing to have self-confidence and self-esteem and basically your own conscience. Imagine being able or independent enough where you can form opinions about direction that you're receiving, to the point where you might receive some direction that doesn't make sense from a human standpoint and say, you know what, that's a load of bollocks. I don't agree with that. And not only do I not agree with it, if I were to follow it, it would be detrimental or even extremely harmful either to myself or to others. So I'll take a pass on that. I mean well towards the organization. The organization has my support. It must be difficult to manage an organization as big as this one. So kudos to everyone who's trying to keep it all going, whatever. I'm a fan. But no, thank you. This particular direction is wrong, and I'm not going to go along with it. There's no room for that when you're one of Jehovah's Witnesses. It is obedience or else. As we heard there towards the beginning of this clip, Keith Brown makes it perfectly clear that it's a matter of life or death. Your everlasting life, or let's just be clear, your life hinges on whether you are obedient to the organization or not. It's not a question of simply saying that you love Jehovah. You have to prove it, which, if you think about it, means that when Armageddon comes, again, it's not going to be a question of just angels and the anointed riding around on heavenly horses killing wicked people. There's going to be a whole lot of Jehovah's Witnesses dying who've become discouraged, who've stopped attending meetings, who say they love Jehovah, but for whatever reason aren't proving it enough. And who really gets to be the judge when it comes to how much you're proving what you say if you say that you love Jehovah? Who gets to be the judge? This is why Jehovah's Witnesses are in this perpetual state of self-loathing and feeling insecure, because they never know whether they've done enough. You can be doing everything in the organization. You can be giving every last minute to doing family worship, Bible studying, preparing for the meetings, preaching, you name it. But if there's something else that you've missed, if there's some other way that you could be serving Jehovah, and Armageddon comes and you're not proving your professed love for Jehovah, you're toast.
So, based on current direction from the branch, it seems best that we implement the adjustment that we discussed. Here's one approach we could take. Since
I'd never consider handling the situation this way. And when you look at the direction, to me, it could be interpreted a number of ways. We'll probably be right back here on his next visit, having to fix all this.
Can I get your thoughts on something?
Sure.
The SEALs direction. You've been serving for years. Does this approach make sense to you?
Does this approach make sense to me? If I'm honest, no. In fact, I struggled with it through the whole meeting. That's why I just needed a moment to get my mind right.
What do you mean by that?
Well, I had to remind myself of something. And this scripture came to mind. Read verse 22.
Look, to obey is better than a sacrifice, and to pay attention than the fat of rams. Okay, I get that. But maybe he hasn't thought it all through.
Well, you know, we all give our thoughts on the matter. And ultimately, the circuit overseer gave direction based on what he got from the branch office. I just had to remind myself that it's not about me or what I think. In fact, I just need to be patient, obey the direction. The rest is up to Jehovah.
You're right. Thanks.
Trust me, I needed that reminder from Jehovah just as much as you.
I appreciate you sharing that with me.
Sure.
You have any plans on Sunday for service?
Isn't it fantastic that just in the brief span of time between exiting the meeting room and being confronted by a fellow elder regarding this inexplicable or contentious decision that's been made by the circuit overseer, the older of the two elders manages to correct his thinking so that he can quote scripture to a younger elder who's having the exact same issues with the direction. This is direction that doesn't make sense. What on earth are we supposed to do? Well, of course, there's only one thing you're supposed to do in this situation, whether you're an elder or an ordinary publisher, an ordinary rank and file Jehovah's Witness, and that's just do as you're told. You could be told to do something that doesn't make sense from a human standpoint, as the publications clearly say, and you just have to follow along with it because you don't get a say in the matter. It's not for you to have an opinion. It's not for you to disagree. You've just been told to do something and you need to follow through. And doesn't that sort of thinking get you to any number of awful outcomes? I mean, it gets you straight to Jonestown. It gets you straight to drinking the Kool-Aid if you follow it to its fullest extent. Oh, here's something I want you to do. It might not make sense to you from a human standpoint, but I have authority here. You accept my authority. I'm telling you to do it, so you should do it. That's how culty this organization is becoming. And notice how just having an internal dialogue about this, even just questioning internally without voicing your disagreement, is described as being a flaw in someone's mind.
Does this approach make sense to me? If I'm honest, no. In fact, I struggled with it through the whole meeting. That's why I just needed a moment to get my mind right.
I needed a moment to get my mind right. So the problem was with him, it turns out, conveniently. The organization can do no wrong. The circuit overseer can do no wrong. Their minds will always be right. The governing body's decisions will always be right. If there's any issue, if there's any controversy, if there's any difficulty in accepting direction, it must be a problem on the part of the recipient of the direction. You have to get your mind right as a Jehovah's Witness. You must obey without question.
The question we need to ask ourselves is, how can I support Jehovah's anointed king, like Jonathan did? Do you see why we say that? Well, how do you support Jehovah's anointed king today? Here are two important ways we do so. Number one, Acts 10:42. Acts 10:42. It reads that Jesus, the anointed king, ordered us to preach to the people and to give a thorough witness. So when you preach, you are actively supporting Jehovah's anointed king because you obey his command. But preaching requires patience, as we saw this morning, does it not? Because we will have to preach whatever the difficulties until Jesus says it's over. So our full efforts in the disciple-making work are really showing Jesus that we support him as the anointed king. But Jesus is also the head of the congregation. how does he expect us to support him in this role as the head of the congregation? Well, that brings us to the second way we support him. Hebrews 13:17. Please turn to Hebrews 13:17. Be obedient to those who are taking the lead among you, and be submissive, for they are keeping watch over you as those who will render an account, so that they may do this with joy and not with sighing, for this would be damaging to you. Be obedient, be submissive to those who are taking the lead among you, to the elders in the congregation. In other words, cooperate with the elders. Do you see how this is us supporting Jesus as the anointed king? Well, we said he's the head of the congregation. Jesus organized congregations because he wants to take care of you. And one way he wants to take care of you is by making sure that there are well-qualified elders appointed in the congregation to support you. So when we see the direction, the scriptural counsels of the elders as if coming from Jehovah, well, then don't you think we're saying to Jesus that we see the arrangement, we see things his way, Jehovah's way, and that we're ready to support that? It tells him that. That's how we support him in the congregation.
If you say so, Sebastian. We've just been listening to Sebastian Del Gran, who is a Bethelite from the Fishkill facilities of Jehovah's Witnesses. He's taking us through the symposium item, Better to be Patient Than to be Haughty in Spirit. Imitate Jonathan, not Absalom. And again, it's all about obedience, isn't it? Obey, obey, obey. Obey without question. Never mind if it doesn't make sense to you. Never mind if the direction's actually going to hurt you in some way or cause you some kind of either inconvenience or outright damages, you know? You've just got to go along with whatever you're told. Maybe you're told by your elders that it would not be a good thing for you to pursue legal recourse against someone who's abused you. That's certainly happened in the past. According to this logic, you would just have to go along with it, wouldn't you? If you're an abuse survivor, oh, my elders have told me to just forgive and forget. I need to forgive freely my abuser. And how can I be forgiving them if I'm reporting them to the police? I'd better just go along with the direction I'm receiving. That's where this sort of advice takes you. And he's quoting there from Hebrews 13, verse 17, be obedient to those taking the lead among you. Clearly, Hebrews 13, verse 17 wasn't written with congregations of Jehovah's Witnesses in mind. Manifestly, that's the case. This is yet again presuppositional argumentation. Sebastian Del Gran, or the writers of the outline he's reading from, are asking the audience to presuppose that this is God's organization in the last days, that it is effectively a continuation of the arrangement set up in the New Testament for Christian worship. And therefore, when it's talking about those taking the lead among you, it's talking about elders, circuit overseers, governing body members in the here and now. Manifestly, that is, well, it's just wrong. It's just a wrong application of Scripture. And yet it's being used to push this incredibly harmful rhetoric that doesn't just require Jehovah's Witnesses to be obedient, it demands them to be submissive.
Be obedient, be submissive to those who are taking the lead among you, to the elders in the congregation. In other words, cooperate with the elders.
So it's not just about obeying the elders and cooperating with the elders. You need to be submissive to the elders. And doesn't this run contrary to everything they say about elders serving the congregation? Oh, elders are Christian shepherds. They are beneath the congregation. They're there to serve members of the congregation and help them spiritually whenever called upon, whenever summoned for help. The elders are there to serve the congregation. Well, doesn't this talk by this Bethelite, Sebastian del Gran, really highlight the fact that it's never been the case that elders serve the congregation? Rather, the congregation serves the elders.
There could be other situations in the congregation that will require a whole lot more patience to support the anointed king. Say, for example, you become aware or you become the victim of an injustice in the congregation. The elders have been informed. Now what? Now patience. These things take time to be resolved properly as per Jehovah's arrangement. And we don't take things back into our own hands because it takes time. We want to give Jehovah's arrangements a chance, right? And once it's done properly, it's always for everybody's good, for the greatest good of all.
Wow. Well, thank you, I guess. I mean, in many ways, this year's 2023 Exercise Patience Convention of Jehovah's Witnesses is the gift that keeps on giving, in at least just putting the cards out on the table and letting everyone see what the problems are with this organization. They're being very upfront, very transparent about their attitudes in so many areas of concern, so many legitimate areas of criticism when it comes to Jehovah's Witnesses. And here we've heard from Sebastian del Gran, a Bethelite from Fishkill, just telling straight up victims of injustice not to take matters into their own hands, to just leave things to the elders and let them take however long they want to take, which could be indefinitely, couldn't it? Apparently, everything needs to be done properly through the Jehovah's Witness arrangement, the internal criminal system that Jehovah's Witnesses operate. Their way of doing things takes priority over making sure that victims of injustice get justice. And we can immediately see how this disgusting ideology would perfectly suit an organization intent on preserving its name and reputation and covering up child abuse and work against the interests of those who have been abused. These words for me are shameful and despicable. They're not just the words of some Bethelite. Sebastian del Gran is reading from an outline here. And trust me, I've worked in a convention chairman's office where they run a convention, and each and every speaker on a convention has to have a debrief after they've given a talk, where they go before the chairman and they have a one-on-one to make sure they've delivered the outline according to what's been given to them. So these aren't just some wayward extremist thoughts by one individual. This is the organization's policy when it comes to victims of injustice. And in my view, this clip that we've just seen is right up there in terms of video evidence showing clearly why Jehovah's Witnesses have such a terrible problem when it comes to dealing with child abuse.
How's the family doing today?
Oh, we're doing good.
Can you get some water for
Amani is making dinner.
Uh,
We have family worship today too, so yeah.
You and Amani are such good parents. Always teaching. Oh.
It takes a lot of patience and practice. But don't worry, you're going to be a great mother. I can already tell.
Thank you.
And you won't be alone. We'll be here to help you. We want to help you teach your child about Jehovah. You're part of our family now.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Little bit of love bombing there. We want to help you teach your child about Jehovah. You know, the child that's not even born yet. Don't worry, we'll help make sure that before even you have committed as a Jehovah's Witness, because this is just a Bible study as far as I can tell, before even you've made your mind up, we're going to make sure that the child in your womb grows up as a follower of this religion that you still aren't completely done learning about. So almost from the get-go, this year's feature drama is disturbing. The title, as you've seen there, is Commit Your Way to Jehovah. And on the Saturday afternoon session of this year's exercise, Patience Convention Jehovah's Witnesses are shown the first half. It's a weird one, isn't it? So they've quite evidently filmed this during COVID. They will have had to. And it seems that the pandemic restrictions were a key factor, or I would assume they were a key factor, in them making a film about Africa that's very obviously been filmed in, I'm going to guess, North America. So they're trying to do that thing where by using music and lighting, and they've obviously found a tree there that looks sort of like it might be a native species to Africa. They've used set design and all of the tricks of the trade to try and fool us into thinking that this is Africa where this film is set. But it doesn't really work, does it? I don't think you need to have much of a knowledge of filmmaking or be much of a film connoisseur for these tricks to be failing and for it to be practically impossible to buy into this. You're looking at this thinking, this is a little bit wrong, you know? And you'll see what I mean as the drama unfolds. I mean, it's not wrong, it's not grossly inappropriate, but it just feels a bit off because it's easier for film producers in a wealthy country to depict poverty than it is for film producers in a third world country to depict wealth. And you'll always have that issue, I realize, if you're making any kind of film about Africa from the perspective of the West. So, of course, Western filmmakers should be able to make films about Africa, including having the creative license to film portions in other locations other than Africa that are meant to be in Africa. But when the purpose behind the project is to exploit and to mislead and to essentially sow propaganda, it makes it even more dodgy, I would suggest, to use these particular tricks of the trade to try to appeal to people in African countries or who have an African culture or an African background, not for the purpose of enlightening them or telling any meaningful story or even just entertaining them, but for the purpose of persuading them to be committed to an organization.
Amani, there's something we have to talk about. Let me ask, how steady has your work been lately?
My carpentry work has been slow, but we're getting by. You know, my Mombi and I, we sell wood carvings at the market for some extra income.
Wow. Amani, look at what you've done on our land. You're a good carpenter. You built this house. And you have a beautiful family too. If Mom and Dad were alive, they would be very proud of you. You know what I'm thinking, Amani? With your skill set, you could have more. I'm talking about real security for you and the family. A real government carpentry contract. See, just look here. This is the amount we can be making.
Yes?
Yes, for real. All you need to do, Amani, is just...
Yeah. No, not a party card. You know I can't sign this. Wait, you didn't sign me up, did you?
I know what you're thinking about, Amani. See, you don't have to involve yourself with the political leaders. You don't even have to attend any of the rallies. You know what? Forget it. I'll take care of this one. Basically, you'll be working for me. So don't worry about the card. All I need you to do is just sign here. And this becomes a reality for us. Amani, you know I love you. And if you become successful, I will be very happy. I have to get back. But just think about it. And think about the family too.
Oh dear, Amani is being tempted by his brother with the wrong kind of employment. So we're watching this year's feature drama, Commit Your Way to Jehovah, and a central part of the plot is that Amani, a Jehovah's Witness, is being enticed into having political connections through his brother, who is part of this political party in a country where there is political and civil unrest. So it's a bit of a powder keg country, apparently. We don't know which country it is. It's never mentioned. But the point is that there is friction, there is violence in this particular part of Africa. And Amani ends up having to make a decision between his loyalty to the organization versus his feelings towards his brother and his feelings to please and impress his brother, who wants to form some kind of business partnership with him, although a massive plot hole has already opened up here. What sort of job is it he's being asked to do again?
A real government carpentry contract. See,
a real government carpentry contract. Because those are a thing. What do you do for work? Oh, I work for the government. Oh, you work for the government. Wow. So what do you do? Are you a politician? Are you a diplomat? What kind of office do you hold? I'm a government... Sorry, I missed that. Say that again. I'm a government carpenter. I do carpentry for the government. So you build things for the government out of wood? Yes, that's what I do. It's extremely lucrative for some reason. I'm sorry, how is that even a thing? How did that come up when they were writing the script for this? Okay, so we need the central character who's a Jehovah's Witness to overcome some sort of temptation. What could it be? I know he's a really good carpenter, but he has a brother who's involved politically. And his brother needs him to make tables and chairs for the government.
We humbly come before you in the name of your Son, Jesus Christ. Amen.
Amen. Thank you, brother, so much for making the time to come tonight so we can talk about an important matter. As you are aware, the branch has recommended that we meet and discuss the possibility of civil unrest in our area.
You know, just yesterday, the marketplace was buzzing.
There will always be rumors surrounding the elections. But you know, I even heard of some reports on the radio.
I want us to see what the threat is in our area and what we can do for the friends so we can help them if they decide to flee.
Wait, did they direct us to leave or ask us to think about it?
Well, they have advised us to have a plan. The way people are feeling about the current leadership now, it's just a matter of time that a conflict will come in this area. The safety of the congregation is the concern.
Yes, I agree with that. And, you know, I've heard about the violence of these militias towards other tribes.
But is it worth alarming the congregation? Has anyone actually seen anything out of the ordinary here?
This is serious. Where there is smoke, there's fire.
I'm sorry. That's what I'm trying to say. Telling the friends to flee now? Brothers, I've been through this before. And trust me, there isn't even smoke yet. Doesn't this seem a bit hasty?
Yes, Musa. Brothers, we may differ in our opinions. But remember, we are still one body. Think about the times that we live in. These are the last of the last days. So we expect that these conditions would increase. Proverbs 22, verse 3. Remember, it tells us, the shrewd one sees the danger and conceals himself. So it is shrewd to prepare the congregation mentally and spiritually.
Yes, these are the last of the last days, so we need to be prepared. That's the message. In this part of this year's feature drama, Commit Your Way to Jehovah, in this part of the story, we see that Amani is an elder in his local congregation. The elders have been summoned to a meeting where they're learning that direction has come from the branch to prepare an exit strategy, to prepare for the congregation members to flee the territory due to civil unrest. And we learn that due to his past experiences, for whatever reason, Amani is against the idea of uprooting. He feels as though the threat of violence is being exaggerated and he wants to stay put. But he's put in his place by his friend Musa, who is a family friend. And Musa basically trots out, as though it's scripture, Stephen Lett's words about this being the last of the last days.
Think about the times that we live in. These are the last of the last days.
Are they now, Musa? You're feeling confident about that, are you? Despite the same rhetoric being used over 140 years of Watchtower literature and videos and paraphernalia. They've been on alert for over a century when it comes to the last days and Armageddon. they've had false prediction after false prediction. 1914, 1925, 1975. The generation that will not pass away. And in each and every instance where they've dared to be assertive about the times that we're living in, they've been proven wrong. So my question would be, how is this going to age? What's it going to be like watching this drama 10, 20, 30, 50 years from now, which people will be doing? You can bet on it. People will be watching this drama in the future thinking, well, that hasn't aged all that well. And I just couldn't help but think back to the occasion in which Tony Morris got up on the platform. Obviously, Tony Morris is no longer a governing body member. But I actually covered this in one of my rebuttals. Perhaps Tibor can show a thumbnail to the relevant sushi. Tony Morris seemed a little bit uncomfortable with this last of the last days rhetoric, or this phrase that was so famously coined by Stephen Lett at the start of the COVID pandemic as a complete overreaction when we first started learning about the pandemic and starting to take precautions and that kind of thing. Tony Morris was downplaying this term, in my opinion, or throwing a bit of shade on it and suggesting that it was reminiscent of the sort of hysteria that was seen in the organization around the 1975 period. And isn't it interesting that for whatever reason, Tony Morris is no longer on the governing body, so it seems Stephen Lett won the argument. And now Stephen Lett's thoughts and ideas and opinions are being repeated in Jehovah's Witness propaganda in almost the same breath that they might quote Bible verses.
Would we have to flee?
We received direction from the branch. Those brothers are so far away, though. I keep wondering if they are being overly cautious. Maybe for the brothers in the city. But for us here, is that the right decision?
I don't know. Would we have to go to a camp?
I think about Musa. He would not be able to make such a trip.
I'm thinking about Sifa too.
You know, around the elections, these tensions always seem to pop up. But overall, things are pretty stable around here, don't you think?
See all those people out there?
Yeah.
They would love to work with me. This is not an offer you refuse. And you said this was all done and you had it all covered.
He'll be fine.
Fix it! And don't waste my time.
Dunia, you have to let me explain.
Explain what, Amani? How could you embarrass me like that in front of him?
You don't understand.
Understand what? This is a lifetime deal for the family. You see why I don't bring big contract to you? I can't believe you. How could you refuse that?
Hold on.
In front of him. I can't believe this.
Jacobo, you there?
So there you go. Thus concludes the first part of this year's feature drama being shown to Jehovah's Witnesses at their Exercise Patience Convention. The title, Commit Your Way to Jehovah. Shiz is getting real for Amani and his family, with some violence and civil unrest being fairly graphically depicted, which I'll come to. And Amani is in a particularly tight spot, as we've seen there, due to his reticence to take on the job of government carpenter, which again is apparently a thing. That's the offer that he shouldn't refuse. Very Godfather-esque, wasn't it, that part? This is an offer that you do not refuse. You mean to be a government carpenter? Yes, that. I need my government carpenter. All of my political aspirations will unravel unless you can make tables and chairs for me. I mean, could they not have chosen pretty much anything else? I'm thinking something like social media campaign manager or someone who does coding, anything that's remotely plausible as being lucrative in terms of a job. But apparently this political figure, his whole political campaign, his aspirations hinge on how good Amani is at knocking together tables and chairs. Anyway, I don't want to repeat myself. What I did find interesting was that first clip I showed you where Amani is confiding in his wife. This is actually quite interesting because it alludes to an aspect of Jehovah's Witness culture that doesn't really get talked about that much, and that's the whole elder's wife deal. Basically, if you're a woman in the Jehovah's Witness organization, you can't aspire to any position of power or authority because women aren't allowed to be teachers. They're not allowed to take any role of leadership within the congregation. The only thing they can aspire to is maybe giving experiences on the platform when called upon, giving answers in the meetings, basically doing anything under the direction of a male teacher. They can aspire to cleaning the Kingdom Hall, or they can aspire to being pioneers and doing lots of work in the preaching work. And beyond that, your levels of aspiration then go into whose wife you are. So if you can be, say, an elder's wife or a circuit overseer's wife, or maybe a Bethel elder's wife, I don't know, then suddenly you have a bit more prestige than simply a woman in the congregation who's perhaps a pioneer, or just any woman in the congregation. You have a little bit more insight into what's going on behind the scenes. And it's for this reason that, of course, elders are going to confide to at least some degree in their wives. They're not supposed to do it. It's not like it's a written policy thing where they're given permission to confide in their wives. If anything, you can probably find Watchtower articles reminding elders not to do this. But because it's so rampant, they even include it in the script, and not even in a derogatory way. It's not like we're supposed to frown on this or question the fact that Amani's wife is being given a heads up, advance warning of the direction that's coming from the branch. It's just a given that this happens. And my question would be, how does this fit in with the whole falling in line with Jehovah's direction and the way God's organization is supposed to operate? Isn't this an entirely human thing if elders can divulge information so freely to their wives? And the second thing I found really interesting was how they are again showing violence at their convention. And this is a convention, I make this point practically every year, but it bears repeating. This is a convention that children are supposed to attend. if you're a Jehovah's Witness parent, if you are a mum or dad, it's not optional whether you bring your children along. You have to bring them along. You're supposed to bring them along. Their presence is expected. So if children are supposed to be attending these conventions, in my opinion, this places a duty upon the people making the content to make sure it's age appropriate. And my question would be, is what we've just seen age appropriate for, say, a 2-year-old, a 3-year-old, a 4-year-old? Would it not be unnecessarily frightening for them to have this scene where suddenly men emerge with baseball bats and machine guns, and you hear machine gun fire, and you see people fleeing in a state of panic? Is that really age appropriate for young children? Of course, the organization has already given their opinion on this.
We might mention that we've had just a few parents write in expressing concern that some of our videos depict scenes that could have an effect on children who've been protected from anything even hinting at an act of violence. Many parents choose to help their children appreciate the graphic visual imagery of a Bible-based video, while at the same time building trust in Jehovah, who will be with them in times of distress. This is similar to what they do when reading a graphic biblical account to their children from the Scriptures, such as from the book of Revelation. Be assured that we'll continue to be sensitive to the feelings of you parents when we produce a video that's based on a Bible account that includes descriptions of warfare or other incidents of violent actions. We'll do so with care, while not ignoring the powerful details depicted in the inspired Word of God.
So that's why we're seeing yet more violence in this year's convention. And I know it's not graphic violence. It's not like you can see blood or you can see people being shot. I don't think you can even see guns being fired. But I don't think you even need to be a parent to know that there are some things that very small children shouldn't really be seeing, or where at least parents should have discretion. They should have the ability to decide what sort of content their children are seeing. Unfortunately for them, unfortunately for parents who do feel this isn't age appropriate, who are Jehovah's Witnesses, the decision by the likes of Stephen Lett has already been made for them.
Now, I want to go through with you 3 scriptures. Let's go through them quickly. Here's the first one. John chapter 15 and verse 20. That's where Jesus said, if they have persecuted me, they will also persecute you. Pretty straightforward, right? What about 2 Timothy chapter 3 and verse 12? That's where the Apostle Paul said, all, did you get that word? All those desiring to live with godly devotion in association with Christ Jesus will also be persecuted. And how about Revelation chapter 2 and verse 10? It says, do not be afraid of the things that you're about to suffer. Look, the devil will keep on throwing some of you into prison. So the scriptures make it very, very clear that all of those who want to be servants of Jehovah are going to experience persecution. Well, as of this year, 2023, our work is either banned or restricted in 33 different lands. This affects the worship of hundreds of thousands of our brothers and sisters who are just like you and me, just ordinary people who want to serve God. And as of today's date, May 13, 2023, over 189 of our faithful brothers and sisters are imprisoned because of their faith. If you want to keep up to date with that, go to jw.org and go to the page Jehovah's Witnesses Imprisoned for Their Faith. Those figures are updated all the time.
We've been watching some opening comments from the concluding talk of the second day of this year's 2023 Exercise Patience Convention of Jehovah's Witnesses. The speaker there is, of course, governing body member Mark Sanderson, who has the theme, "When Persecuted, We Patiently Endure." Yes, this talk is all about persecution, as we've just heard. At practically every convention nowadays, there is some part of the program devoted almost entirely to discussing persecution and reminding Jehovah's Witnesses that they are being persecuted and of the reasons why they are being persecuted. And Mark Sanderson there briefly went through 3 Bible verses, which he interpreted to mean that it's inevitable that Jehovah's Witnesses will be persecuted because they are, after all, God's one and only true religion on the earth. They are true Christians. And look, to be clear, I feel like I have to say this every single time, and there are reasons why, trust me. To be clear, I feel it's wrong that Jehovah's Witnesses are persecuted by governments around the world for their faith. Interestingly, the number cited there by Mark Sanderson of over 189 has dropped slightly even since he gave this talk, which was just a few weeks ago. If you go to the page he's alluding to on jw.org, under the Global News section, Jehovah's Witnesses imprisoned for their faith by location. Jehovah's Witnesses imprisoned for their faith as of July 2023. It lists 4 countries by name, or four regions, you could say, one being Crimea, the other Eritrea, the other Russia, the other Singapore, and the other lands, in other words, other parts of the world that they can't name because Jehovah's Witnesses abandon those areas. And for all of those regions, the number now is over 186. So the number has fallen ever so slightly, even in the few weeks since Mark Sanderson spoke these words. That alone should indicate how problematic it is to point to statistics on detention of Jehovah's Witnesses as evidence of how deep we are in the last days, or as evidence that Jehovah's Witnesses are conspicuous as God's one and only true religion. And to be super clear, I don't have a problem with Mark Sanderson reading these figures or drawing attention to the persecution of Jehovah's Witnesses, because if he's not going to do it, who is? You know, any amount of persecution suffered by a religious minority is wrong. And of course, you know, the main outcry is going to come from the religious minority themselves. It's right that he, as a prominent figure within the Jehovah's Witness religion, is using his platform to talk about the mistreatment of his fellow believers. The problem I have always with the Jehovah's Witness approach to showing persecution or discussing persecution is, number one, the exploitative nature of it. And this becomes obvious as Mark Sanderson's talk unfolds. They are using persecution for propaganda value, have done for years now. They use the heartbreaking stories of a carefully curated small sample of Jehovah's Witnesses who've suffered, and they use their suffering and their pain to manipulate the broader population of Jehovah's Witnesses who are overwhelmingly not suffering, because 186 is a lot of people, but it's clearly not 8.5 million, is it? So the vast majority of Jehovah's Witnesses are not being persecuted. True, there are many, Mark Sanderson mentions hundreds of thousands. It's probably more like 200 or 300,000 Jehovah's Witnesses around the world who do live in countries where the work is under ban. But it's a little bit disingenuous because the organization encourages them to stay put. It doesn't say, right, we need to pull our people out of there. They even send Jehovah's Witnesses to countries like China, or encourage Jehovah's Witnesses to go to China where the preaching work is under ban so that they can preach anyway, at risk of being deported or at risk of falling foul of the local authorities. So it's not like they're taking a fully responsible approach when it comes to lessening the suffering of Jehovah's Witnesses. As far as they're concerned, the preaching work is more important than the individual suffering of Jehovah's Witnesses. So the exploitative nature of this content is one huge problem that I've always had. And the other problem I have is that they only ever talk about Jehovah's Witnesses. I think if you're putting yourself in their shoes, and if you're thinking, how would I deal with the matter of persecution if I were in a position of authority within a religious minority? I guess one thing I would be very careful to do is make it clear that we're not the only ones being persecuted, that there are lots of religious minorities being persecuted, and the persecution of people on grounds of their religion is wrong. It's a human rights violation, and therefore religious groups need to be working together to highlight each other's persecution so that authorities take more notice and do what they can to stop it from happening. And that's quite clearly not what's happening with Jehovah's Witnesses. So you take that figure of currently over 186 Jehovah's Witnesses imprisoned around the world for their faith. And just as one example, I'm going to read to you from a BBC article, Who Are the Uyghurs and Why is China Being Accused of Genocide? This was last updated on 24th of May 2022. And there's a paragraph in that article which I think should be read. Analysis of data contained in the latest police documents called the Xinjiang Police Files showed that almost 23,000 residents, or more than 12% of the adult population of one county, were in a camp or prison in the years 2017 and 2018. If applied to Xinjiang as a whole, the figures would mean the detention of more than 1.2 million Uyghur and other Turkic minority adults. 1.2 million detained in Xinjiang, according to an extrapolation in this BBC article. So again, just to be clear, it's wrong for there to be even one person detained on account of their faith. And I am personally appalled that around the world there are over 186 who are currently imprisoned for the crime of being Jehovah's Witnesses, when really they're being exploited by an organization that isn't being held accountable. So it's the followers who are being made to suffer and not the leaders. But why can't there be a little bit of context? Why can't the likes of Mark Sanderson admit that Jehovah's Witnesses are by no means unique when it comes to the global scourge of religious persecution?
It's
hard to explain a rage, of being angry that I was a witness. Because I didn't want to make him angry and make a fight. I wanted to have a good marriage, A few times I'd get up in the middle of the night and finish my watchtower or finish studying for the book study in the bathroom. That was a safe place. I didn't have the nice family and you're bringing your kids to the hall and doing things with people. It felt impossible to be a good witness. If anybody called and asked for Sister Crosby, that was flipping the angry switch to my husband. On a bad day, I did feel sometimes like dying. Or it'd be easier to die. I prayed a lot to just do the right thing. And then I realized why it's in the Lord's Prayer to pray to be forgiving, because you don't always want to forgive the person, but we need to, we have to. And it works when you pray for help about that. Meetings and studying were my lifeline to Jehovah, besides praying. Just made me always feel like a witness. But assemblies were hard because it was just hard telling them. Just going made him angry. A lot of times I never knew what I'd come home to after an assembly or a convention. And I came home as usual. He wasn't there when I came home. There was 30 seconds. He just went in to go and I pulled up and got out of the car. He had been waiting there all day for me because he wanted to come out and say something to the people that dropped me off. Probably not very nice. I think I always felt Jehovah's hand when I came home. Some people might think, well, we'd have a better marriage if I stopped being a witness. Because people stop studying because their husbands are opposed. Well, how do you feel about Jehovah? What do you think? How does he feel? If you depend on Jehovah for the help, he'll give it to you and you'll feel it. It builds your faith. And you know that you just got through something. You can't believe you just did that. It actually happened and you know that he helped you. I continued to be a witness. I could be a witness. It really happened. I've been pioneering for 13 years and I've really enjoyed it. Gotten to study with people and I like talking to people about Jehovah. It really makes you feel good. And even if people aren't nice, they're getting a witness and they have a chance. And who knows what'll happen in the future.
Yes, who knows? We've been listening to the story of Patricia Crosby, as shown in the concluding talk on the second day of this year's Exercise Patience Convention. The theme of the talk is When Persecuted, We Patiently Endure. And to be clear, there are actually 4 stories or 4 testimonials that get shown throughout the talk. And it's a little bit confusing because they chop the testimonials up and mix them in with each other. And I've just decided, for the purposes of brevity, to just feature 2 of the testimonials that I find personally quite interesting, this being one of them. And I've had to kind of piece them together so that we see Patricia Crosby's full story without being distracted by other stories, if that makes sense. And hopefully you can understand why I find Patricia Crosby's story so compelling. What she's describing here is an abusive relationship.
On a bad day, I did feel sometimes like dying. Or it'd be easier to die.
On a bad day, I did feel sometimes like dying, or it would be easier to die. Those are the words, surely, of a woman who is in or has been in an extremely abusive relationship. It's interesting that she doesn't go into detail regarding her husband's rage and how it manifested itself. She talks about him being angry, and specifically angry about her connections with Jehovah's Witnesses. She doesn't talk about how that anger manifested itself. And that's quite an important part of the story to leave out. I mean, I suppose you could argue that there are children in the audience, children of Jehovah's Witness parents, but then the organization isn't too bothered about what they watch or listen to when it comes to the violence in their dramas. So, I don't know, for me personally, at least if we're dealing this from an adult perspective, I feel like there is a lot missing in this story. And ultimately, I cannot help but think of the organization's stance on domestic violence. And I feel like that must be what we're looking at here. We must be, and I can't prove it, but if I had to bet, what we're seeing here is a classic example of a woman who, because of her religion, is trapped in an abusive marriage, because her religion is telling her you cannot divorce your husband unless there is proof of adultery. Adultery is everything. If there's adultery, then you can get divorced. But if there's no proof of adultery, you have to stay married to someone, even if they're being violently abusive towards you. And I've mentioned this Watchtower article before on the channel, but it bears repeating in the context of what we've just seen. It's the Watchtower of December 2018, page 14. Let's read a little bit from paragraphs 17 and 18. Admittedly, there have been instances where an unbelieving husband seems to prove that he is not agreeable to staying with her. He might be extremely physically abusive, even to the point that she feels that her health or life is in danger. He might refuse to support her and the family or severely endanger her spirituality. In such cases, some Christians have personally decided that despite what he might say, the mate is not agreeable to staying together and that a separation is necessary. But other Christians in comparably difficult situations have not. They have endured and tried to work at improving matters. Why? And then if we scroll down to paragraph 18, many loyal Christians have remained with an unbelieving mate under very trying circumstances. They can testify that doing so was worthwhile in a special sense when their mate became a true worshipper. So you have to stay with an unbelieving spouse who is abusive towards you, not just because you don't have any scriptural grounds, is what it's called. You don't have any scriptural basis to leave them if they're not committing adultery against you, but also it might benefit the organization in some way, because who knows, through you putting up with their abuse, like a good Christian sister, it might convince them to become a true worshipper. And then we get an extra Jehovah's Witness who can go around people's doors and flog our literature for us. That's the reasoning that's given here. Absolutely disgraceful and shameful, isn't it? And this teaching is keeping countless men and women in abusive marriages where their very lives are in danger. And notice, before we move on in this talk, another part of this testimonial that we need to talk about.
And then I realized why it's in the Lord's Prayer to pray to be forgiving, because you don't always want to forgive the person, but we need to, we have to. And it works when you pray for help about that.
There we have it again. You've got to be forgiving. Doesn't matter what someone's doing to you. If they're a fellow worshipper, or in this case, if you're married to them, you have to be forgiving towards them. You have to. It's compulsory. They could be abusing you. They could be endangering your very life. But the advice being given here is to forgive them.
The search lasted 12 hours.
After that, Aliptina was taken to a temporary detention facility, and I was interrogated until 2 in the morning. I said that I had a serious illness, and therefore I needed to eat. But in spite of that, they didn't allow it.
For 4 months, we did not see each other at all.
Every morning, I prayed to endure this test, and it helped me feel calm.
After one court session, as I was waiting to return to my cell, I met a young female prisoner. And she and I were talking about the name of God. And she said to me, wait. I'm going to write the name on the back of this piece of paper so that I don't forget it.
О, это Багратян и тебя уже затащила в секту.
And this girl came out after the search and said, when the inspector searched me, she looked at the piece of paper and saw God's name. And I said to her, don't worry. Now, neither the inspector nor you will forget the name of God.
In prison, I learned that I had to wait on Jehovah and treat other prisoners kindly. And so I was always ready to witness to them.
Jehovah helped me understand that this was not a time for self-pity, but a time to think about others. When you're busy with the kingdom work, time flies by very quickly.
No, it's not a time for self-pity when you're being mistreated by your government. It's time to think about others. It's time to think about your duty as a Jehovah's Witness. So we've just been hearing the testimonial from Artem and Alevtina, who have been mistreated by the authorities in Russia. Again, this is the concluding talk on the Saturday of the Exercise Patience Convention. When persecuted, we patiently endure. And there are 4 testimonials in total in this talk, and I've just narrowed it down to 2, this being one of them. I just think it's glaringly apparent in just these few clips that we've seen that rather than trying to use their story in a way that will bring about meaningful change, rather than addressing the problem, the main problem of intolerance by certain governmental regimes and the persecution of religious minorities on totally arbitrary grounds, usually in totalitarian countries, rather than tackling that problem, it's all about, again, leveraging the ordeals, the misery of a few individuals to try and manipulate a larger audience. That's what we're seeing here. They're not really, I would suggest, interested in how long Artem was interrogated for, the fact that he was interrogated until 2 a.m. and wasn't allowed to eat. They're not really interested, I would suggest, in the amount of suffering that this couple were put through by their government, again, purely on the basis of what was running through their heads, purely on the basis of the manipulation that they've been subjected to. What they're interested in is, how can we use this story to convince Jehovah's Witnesses that we're all in this together, we're all being persecuted, Satan's world is out to get us. And the most important thing is not we as individuals and whether we're okay. The most important thing is that we use each and every opportunity, even in cases where we're being mistreated by our governments, we use each and every chance we get, no matter the circumstances, to bring others into our group.
So why does the Bible tell us to pray for those who persecute us, to love our enemies? It's so we will not be conquered by hatred. Instead, we'll take the good, we'll conquer the evil with the good, as Romans 12:21 says. And brothers, we do this not just in big areas, sometimes we do it in small things. You know, when we were in the courtroom in Moscow, we had been sitting there, the court hearing had gone on for hours and hours. We'd just been sitting there, there'd been no break. Suddenly there was a break. Now, you probably know about Jehovah's Witnesses. We don't go anywhere without food. You know, that's who we are. So, you know what happened? Just as soon as a break came, here comes brothers with boxes of sandwiches. Where do you get sandwiches in the Supreme? I have no idea. But anyway, here comes the sandwiches. Now, the brother starts handing them out to all the brothers and sisters in the courtroom. And of course, right in front of me, there's someone who's obviously a KGB agent. And so I went like this, you know? And so the brother said to the man, would you like a sandwich, sir? No. Oh, please, have a sandwich. No. So, fine, okay. So, you know what happens when you start eating? Everybody's eating, and all those aromas are traveling through the air. I noticed this man, he's going like this, you know? And so the brother walked up to him again. Sir, please, have a sandwich. Man, okay. Now, what's the point? You see, it's not always in huge things, even in small things. We show that we are not conquered by hatred when we do kind and loving things, even to those who persecute us.
Wow, a spare sandwich found its way past Mark Sanderson. I'm sorry, I couldn't resist. So this is a cute story from the final talk of the Saturday of this year's Exercise Patience Convention. It's been given here by governing body member Mark Sanderson. The theme, when persecuted, we patiently endure. And I just found this little anecdote quite interesting. It was interesting that offering a sandwich to a KGB agent, I'll come to that, somehow proves that Jehovah's Witnesses have the one true faith. Oh, we gave a sandwich even to this nasty agent whose job it was to persecute us. Well, what are you preaching will happen to this agent if Armageddon were to come tomorrow? You are praying every day for an event that will mean his slaughter if he doesn't change and become like you. And yet you're bragging about giving the guy a sandwich as what, his last meal before he gets burnt to a crisp if Armageddon were to come tomorrow. So no, I'm sorry, I'm not that impressed. It's not like Mark Sanderson made the sandwich. And I think it's interesting that he indicated that it was his idea. He pointed to the guy as if instructing, using his governing body member authority. The faithful and discreet slave was present on that occasion to direct that a sandwich be administered to a henchman of Satan's system of things. I wonder what kind of sandwich it was, by the way. Cheese and onion? Prawn sandwich? Who knows? Whatever it was, apparently it smelled good. And we also have this awkward moment where Mark Sanderson says the following.
And of course, right in front of me, there's someone who's obviously a KGB agent.
Obviously a KGB agent. He was obviously a KGB agent. Mark, darling. Mark, sweetie. The KGB don't exist anymore. All you're doing is broadcasting before millions of people how little you know about Russia. So you're showing up in Russia to impress everyone that you, Mark Sanderson, are on location, ready to roll your sleeves up and get your hands dirty when it comes to protecting Jehovah's Witnesses. And it turns out you're just kind of flying in there as someone who doesn't understand the country or its history and doesn't have the slightest grasp on the country or its history. And you don't know that the KGB is effectively disbanded. The KGB was dissolved on December 3rd, 1991, 31 years ago, and has been replaced by the FSB, or Federal Security Service. You don't know that basic thing. You're zooming into this situation based apparently on your knowledge of Russia from watching Cold War films or whatever the hell it is that's been your education on Russia. And imagine, this may seem like I'm nitpicking, but imagine you're a Russian Jehovah's Witness watching this convention, and granted, these talks will be dubbed over into Russian, and they'll probably cover over this slip-up. But if you're watching the convention in English as a Russian, which you will be allowed to do, I'm assuming, you're going to get to this point, and not only are you probably going to find the sandwich story a bit underwhelming if you're personally suffering as a Jehovah's Witness, and you're living day to day with the reality of what it means to be under ban, to have your faith criminalized, you're going to find this cute sandwich story a bit of a distraction and kind of more about putting attention on Mark Sanderson than putting attention on the suffering of Jehovah's Witnesses. But surely the thought's going to pass through your mind, Mark Sanderson doesn't understand my country. He doesn't know that the KGB has been effectively replaced by the FSB. He thinks he's in some kind of spy drama. He thinks he's some kind of hero in some kind of Cold War spy drama. And yet this is the sort of person who's making decisions not just about Jehovah's Witnesses enduring persecution in Russia, but Jehovah's Witnesses enduring persecution all over the world. Anyway, those were my thoughts on the Saturday of this year's Exercise Patience Convention of Jehovah's Witnesses. Stay tuned to the Lloyd Evans channel for the final day of the convention, which will be covered over 2 rebuttals, the Sunday morning and the Sunday afternoon. I'm going to get to work straight away on preparing those for you. But until then, I hope you found this information useful. And as always, thank you for watching.